So Anthro basically provides you with a lot of ready-made examples and statistics and case studies and all these kind of things just to enrich your answers. Why most people essentially take this thing is it is the shortest syllabus. Because see, you have to do some justice to whichever is your field. Okay, and anthropology essentially is a little bit of many different kind of subjects. My suggestion again, for those of you who are preparing with anthro as your subject, one thing that you've got to do is try to utilize your anthropology because you have studied it so well, or you will be studying it so well, because it's a optional jo papers hote hain, that is at a master sort of a level. So you will know the subject in and out. So your conceptual clarity in your biology actually becomes stronger. Science, you should be able to do it. You should take a lot of emphasis, because in case you're an anthro student, trust me, this is basically like bonus questions for you. Every single year you're going to see questions on these. Do invest in science, because many of these questions, thoda sa agar aapka concept clear hai, these things become very intuitive. ठीक है, मतलब even if you basically think कि मतलब what could happen and then go for it ना, okay, 8-9 times out of 10 you'll basically get it right. Hello and welcome to today's webinar. ठीक है, so I think that you guys already know what you're here for. If you guys have any questions along the way, you can basically ask me so that I know like what exactly are you looking out for. ठीक है, but today's topic essentially is going to be how anthropology can be of multiple use. ठीक है, the multi-use advantage of anthropology, or the multi-stage advantage of using and choosing anthropology as your option. First of all, good evening to all of you who are here. Okay, I'm being told that there is a good number of you. Okay, so I'm glad that you are here, because I feel UPSC is one of those exams jahan pe, I think we have to understand what this exam is all about. Okay, I'm here at 𝗖cie. I'm anthropology faculty, so I'll tell you from optional faculty. We have seen a lot of students who make it in their very first attempt, right? And we also see students who basically take a little bit of time before they're able to sort of find their rhythm, and then eventually they find their name on that list. What really saves students a whole bunch of months, or possibly a few attempts, is essentially to understand the nuances of this particular exam. Okay, so I'll try to provide you an idea ki what exactly UPSC exam is all about vis-a-vis your prelims and mains and your interview. Okay, so that you basically get an idea ki matlab aapka effort, like where should it basically go. Okay, and that is that. How do you basically choose an optional and things like that. Now, before I basically start the main part, I just want a quick sort of introduction from all of you on the chat, if you can. Tell me whether you are basically completely new to UPSC. Okay, tell me if you have already started your GS preparation or you've completed your GS preparation. You could basically tell me whether you're already an Anthro student, or you are basically thinking whether you have to take Anthro. Okay, so if you have started GS, that basically tells me that you know what is prelims ka syllabus, what exactly is GS1, GS2, GS3, GS4, essay, interview. If you tell me that you know anthropology ka syllabus, maybe that is a part that I can, if you basically have exposure to it already, then I'll try to keep that part a little short. Okay, so this will basically help me understand the level of that particular group and the kind of questions that you might have, and how I could basically guide you better today. Okay, so I'll basically give you a little bit of an intro about anthropology as a subject for UPSC. Okay, UPSC subject anthropology essentially has a few different types of modules. Okay, so I'll start with this. Right, if you take a look at this, in just a second, let me hear from you. Okay, you have completed GS syllabus is one that I'm hearing. Okay, so you know GS1, GS2, GS3, GS4. Okay, so see, some of you are also writing your prelims this year, right? So I'll basically give you some helpful pointers on this as well. Okay, see, if you take a look at your Anthro ka syllabus, and I think I'll use the other screen there. Okay, generally always remember this. Okay, so if you take a look at your Anthropology ka syllabus, anthropology essentially is it's basically study of man. But what kind of study of man, right? So if you think about what kind of study of man, it basically is a little bit of study of many things. It is a little bit of biological science. It's a little bit of cultural sort of study. It's a little bit of society and development of society. It's a little bit of environment and ecology and adaptation in those. It's a little bit of Indian social issues. I guess it's a lot of Indian social issues. It's a bit of research methods and things like this. It's a little bit of tribes. It's a little bit of caste. It's a little bit of India. ठीक है, it's basically a nice, good balance sort of mix of many different sort of subjects, which essentially supports your prelims, your subjects for GS mains, good chunk of your essay के dimensions and examples and anecdotes could basically be sourced from here, and of course, मतलब it is your option. ठीक है, so I'll just tell you, it's a little bit of many topics that basically are associated with humans. ठीक है, so I'll basically tell you, if you just take a look at this, right? So biological. Anthro, ठीक है, then you have social cultural. Okay, there's a little bit about linguistics or language, linguistic anthro. If you don't know what these are, okay, no need to worry. Okay, a little bit of historical anthro, okay. So there is, let's say, archaeology, okay, fossils or the ancient humans and related human species. You must have seen the very famous sort of a picture, right? Okay, primates, initially we used to be like this, and then we became like this, and then eventually we became erect, right? That's a very famous sort of a pic from Anthro that you must have seen, right? And paper two, essentially, again, you have this part, but India focused, right? So if I say paper two, you're going to have, okay, a lot of Indian society. Okay, you will have tribal society in particular. Okay, so this is your paper two. Okay, this is basically a combined module, which is basically paper one and paper two. Okay, there is a linguistic, there's social cultural, there's biological, right? So if you look at social cultural, basically it covers, let's say, a little bit of economic anthro, just for example. It covers a little bit of political anthro, so a little bit of your polity. You get the picture, right? Okay, it covers a little bit of kinship, it covers a little bit of marriage, it covers a little bit of family. Okay, so let's go marriage. It covers family and the different kind of perspectives therein. Okay, if it's biological anthro, generally you study about evolution, you study about genetics, right? So you've got to know a little bit of, what is a cell, what is a nucleus, inside the nucleus, what do you have, what exactly is a chromosome, how many chromosomes do you have? Okay, so why are chromosomes important? What is the most important sort of a molecule that makes up that chromosome, right? Your DNA molecule. What are segments of that DNA basically called genes? Okay, genes karte kya hai? Right? What does it mean? Why do you have two different sort of alleles as a combo, one from the father, one from the mother, right? Okay, what could basically go wrong? Right? What do genes do? How does gene expression basically work? Okay, so again, so a lot of basically covers your science, especially biological science, to a great sort of extent. Okay, so that is another one. Linguistic is basically about languages and what exactly makes a language, right? Are we the only ones who basically have a language? Do animals basically communicate with each other, right? Is that also language? There are some societies that basically have whistling sort of a language, okay, but they don't have words like we have, right? So does that also make language? Does it also in fact, it's also about how basically language sort of spreads, take it from one place to another. Why do we call it Indo-European sort of a language? Okay, so it's basically that kind of an angle, evolution of languages and something. Okay, so here we have other topics as well. So evolution, genetics, human body, how it works, how it grows, how it develops, right? So these are also important. Okay, and you have a whole bunch of application. Okay, so you have application regarding this. You have Indian society, right? So Indian society essentially is, whatever you have basically studied in your GS1 as a subject, right? So GS1 in your mains, you must have seen, it basically has three different sort of components. So what do you have? You have history, you have geography, and then you have Indian society. Take a history, geography, and Indian society, right? So this is Indian society, but a little more in detail of Indian society. Okay. Okay, so that's going to be Indian society, right? And then you have tribal society. So this basically again covers a lot of ground, right? So generally, if you take a look at it, you have some perspectives on how to basically study society, right? How do you study society? Take what exactly is caste, right? So what is a dominant sort of a caste, right? How is a village sort of organized, right? What is the hierarchy there, right? What is power there, right? What are the land sort of relationships, right? So within this, you have different sort of groups that you have specifically in your syllabus. You have to study about SCs or Dalits. You have to study about tribes. You basically have to study about women and gender, right? You have to study about minorities. What exactly is a minority? Okay, religious minority. linguistic minorities, ठीक है, and a whole lot of such topics here. ठीक है, so basically you're studying the most vulnerable sort of groups. Is that kind of clear? ठीक है, so you have to basically go through all of these. And tribal society is basically, so there is no other subject that essentially studies the tribes as much as we study them in anthropology, right? So, matlab anthropologists or anthropology trained students like you, right? So anthropology trained administrators. So when you make it to the list, you are actually anthropology trained administrators. Okay, so what makes you you, right? You basically bring in a specific kind of a perspective about the tribes. Okay, and tribes are basically important members, because आपके syllabus में भी important है, not only for your anthro, but it is also essentially in, your prelims में आते हैं उसके बारे में, right? उनके बारे में, ठीक है? Then it basically, you will have questions about it in GS1 में, you have questions about them in GS2. ठीक है, मतलब, there are things that you can basically source. In fact, it is the most vulnerable of the entire vulnerable groups in the country. In fact, if you take a look at their population, it's about 10 crores, okay, approx. Half of them are below poverty. So every other tribal is basically below poverty. Okay, so it cannot get worse than tribes in India. Initially, it used to be called as the original affluent society. They used to be the kind of people who used to live in these vast expanses of forests. What you draw, those scenic sort of landscapes that we used to draw, hills and rivers and those waterfalls and treks and things like that. But many of these places have actually been completely closed off for them for varying sort of reasons. And one of those reasons essentially is, like there's a tussle between, Ministry of Environment and Forests, okay, and tribes, right? How do we sort of like think of forest? Is it flora, fauna, and people, or is it only flora and fauna? Does Mowgli belong in the jungle, or is he an outsider to the jungle? You get the picture, right? So, matlab, there are, the ways about thinking about tribes or the communities which live in the forests and around the forests are basically changing today, right? We understand that, the forests are basically, they are healthy and they regenerate when the locals basically live around there. Okay, the people who are meant to be there, not the loggers, not the people who have some stake, okay, or some economic sort of stake in those kind of places. So this is essentially the main sort of idea about what exactly is in your anthropology. Fairly, very clear cut kind of syllabus. The reason why a lot of students, and I think most of you guys, some of you are also already part of the course, some of you are curious about the course, right? The reason I have noticed why most people essentially take this thing is it is the shortest syllabus. Okay, so it is a short syllabus because I am aware of what the other students basically have to study and things like that. Because see, you have to do some justice to whichever is your field. Okay, and anthropology essentially is a little bit of many different kind of subjects, right? So anything that is associated we as humans, right? Anthropology is study of humans, right? So anything that is basically associated with humans, we have to basically touch. Okay, touch and go type का होता है, right? So basically you study economic anthro, you basically study political sort of anthro. So that means you have to understand what is nation, what is state. उसका एक question भी था in prelims in one of the years. You understand, right? And matlab, you have to be aware. So matlab, this thing will be related to Indian society and your tribal society, right? So let's say you're saying social, economic, political justice. What does that mean? What does it mean to the Dalits? What does it mean to tribes? What does it mean to linguistic minorities? What does it mean to tribal religious sort of minorities? What does it mean for women? Intersectionality essentially means that imagine being a woman, okay, and in a lower sort of a caste. And so you get the picture, right? So when all those things basically come in, it becomes a lot more sort of difficult. So even polity, right? You've got to understand constitutional sort of safeguards. There are so many of the kind of things that will be part of your syllabus. The syllabus is definitely short. Okay, it is a little bit of many different kind of topics. And in fact, like you take a look at this, right? So archaeology is essentially lower Paleolithic, middle Paleolithic, upper Paleolithic. What is Paleolithic culture? How is that different from Mesolithic culture, Mesolithic to Neolithic sort of culture? Okay, you study this again in your history, but a little more in detail. But ancient humans, there are so many. Okay, so there are so many. If you see, matlab, it's so difficult to sort of like talk about them. But हमारे syllabus में 5, 6, 7, that's all you have. You understand, right? Okay, you have your Homo erectus, you have your Australopithecine. Okay, you have your Heidelberg. You get the picture, right? So matlab, you have some relatives. that we have to study. But there are so many more, fossils are found in different kind of places. So they've decided to keep anthro kind of relatively short, okay? And it is fairly well sort of defined. ठीक है, मतलब आपको पता है कि you see a particular question, what is it about? ठीक है, am I sourcing it from here? Am I sourcing it from here? Am I sourcing it from here? Right? What is the core sort of idea? It is fairly kind of straightforward. Now, this session is not specifically about anthro. It is essentially what makes anthropology, something that can be used in the other sort of subjects as well. So, for example, my idea here right now is to basically show you that anthropology basically can boost your performance in these. Okay, what do you have here, right? So in your prelims, and I'll tell you where exactly, right? How does it basically help you boost in GS1 and GS2 and GS3 and GS4? Okay, how does it basically help you in essay? Okay, unbeatable sort of examples, for your essay, right? A lot of different sort of like, nitty-gritties that you can basically use. For example, you have a lot of, मतलब GS1 का Indian society is basically completely covered, except for maybe urbanization to some extent, जहाँ पे city के बारे में. Okay, urbanization का impact on humans is basically something that is studied. But if you consider that, मतलब वहाँ पे एक asterisk डालेंगे, but apart from that, you basically cover everything. So basically, anthro अगर आपको पता है, and if it is a shorter sort of syllabus, my suggestion again for those of you who are preparing with anthro as your subject, one thing that you've got to do is try to utilize your anthropology because you have studied it so well, or you will be studying it so well because it's a optional जो papers होते हैं, that is at a master sort of a level. So you will know the subject in and out. ठीक है, मतलब you have plenty of knowledge with regard to at least that syllabus का structure जो मैंने दिखाया था, right? So from all of those kind of portions you have good sort of knowledge, right? Many things always here. You have to be able to use those and then use them here to a great sort of an extent. ठीक है, because if you are going to be able to sort of like find that overlap and use that, ठीक है, पहले optional करके, then you basically do these, you can actually shorten your timeline. ठीक है, and what do I mean by this पहले ऑप्शनल करके? It doesn't mean कि पहले ऑप्शनल करना है कि बाद में something else, but what I'm saying is once you're done with your optional, you can actually use many of what you have studied in your optional because you would have studied. Okay, optional for everybody is it takes some time to read. GS स्कूल लेवल का होता है, राइट? मतलब एनसीईआरटीज पढ़ने पड़ते हैं, बट यहाँ पे इट इज बेसिकली 5 years ऑफ बैचलर्स प्लस मास्टर्स, राइट? सो इफ यू हैव दैट मच अमाउंट ऑफ नॉलेज यू कैन एक्चुअली सॉर्ट ऑफ यूज देम इन ऑल ऑफ दीज काइंड ऑफ सब्जेक्ट्स. ठीक है, so we'll go into each of these things, maybe a minute for each. Okay. See, the first thing is going to be prelims, and prelims is approximately, what is it, 6 months away? Okay. So if it is basically approximately 6 months away, I will just tell you that there are a few areas of your anthropology that you should definitely be able to study before you go to your prelims. Okay, and some of these topics that you can see, I'm not going to read out every one of these, right? But I'll tell you the main sort of idea here, right? So first one is science and biology. See, there is a good chunk of marks that essentially comes from subjects like science and tech. Okay, now science and then technology. Okay, technology could be some recent sort of technology and things like that. But when they essentially say science, thoda sa utha ke dekho, okay, most of the questions in your UPSC prelims for science tend to be from which subject? It actually is from life sciences or from your biology. ठीक है, you should definitely go through your biological anthro. ठीक है, एक बार अच्छे से आपको रिवाइज करना है, especially those topics that I basically tell you, right? The one that I told you, right? You have a cell. Okay, what exactly is cell? What exactly is a nucleus? Nucleus के अंदर क्या है? Nucleus के बाहर क्या है? Right? You have DNA inside. You have DNA outside. Outside the nucleus, mitochondrial DNA, right? So you basically have a different number of chromosomes, DNA, genes, right? And the genes basically do certain kind of things. Okay, actually, if you see, there are a lot of topics from your basic science or basic sort of biology. If you have good sort of conceptual clarity, meaning if you really understand ki, what exactly is DNA recombinant technology, you have to study that. In fact, like earlier today we basically had a class, we talked about this. If you have a very good sort of conceptual clarity, even if they basically give you some questions on this, okay, and they basically give you some options, your intuition will basically tell you ki nahi, this can be so and so. This can also be there because what the bacteria can do, so can the virus. What the virus can do, so can the yeast. You get the picture, right? So your conceptual clarity in your biology actually becomes stronger, right? Well, of course, you study your human evolution, but all those things are basically biology related. Even to explain evolution, right, you've got to understand, what is all that basic sort of science that I've told you. Some of you have already said that you have done your GS, so you probably know what I'm talking about already, right? What exactly is your DNA? How is that different from your mRNA, right? Rather than just remembering it as यहाँ पे 3 point है, यहाँ पे 3 point है, that you will get some in some current affair booklets, you will really understand. Okay, the DNA basically has a particular kind of a role. Okay, if it is more stable, why is it more stable? Right? If it is in the, if it cannot come outside the nucleus, why can it not come out? ठीक है, what is मतलब different sort of RNA है उसका मतलब so you basically get the picture, right? So a lot of those kind of things you will be able to sort of get a feel for because you have conceptual clarity. ठीक है, optional is not a subject जो आप cram करोगे. ठीक है, GS के लिए of course history के लिए okay, इनके बाद ये basically the kind of things that are associated with them is so and so kind of book, and they were good with so and so kind of thing, they built so and so kind of temples and things like that. But here you cannot study optional is basically something that you take interest. You study genetics, you study heredity, right? You study blood groups, you study how people basically adapt to different sort of places, right? Okay, in fact a good chunk of your GS3 science and tech, right, that biotechnology, all those things will be like a lot more done in detail because you understand human biology a lot better. ठीक है, and most of these questions basically come from biotech and human biology. ठीक है, and for those of you who are watching and अगर आपको लग रहा है कि मतलब what should I be studying here or where should my focus be here, again remember bio, human bio plus second section is biotech. यही से many of these questions essentially are coming. ठीक है, and again it should not be just कि what is happening, right? मतलब क्या क्या new schemes है and things like this. No, you've got to understand. ठीक है, if you understand, वो generally बहुत easy question देते हैं, okay, but you have to understand कि मतलब पूछ क्या रहे हैं. ठीक है, why did they basically give this option along with this particular option? You get the picture, right? So मतलब if so I hope that you're getting the picture of what I'm saying, right? मतलब I cannot give you some examples without going into the details of these. Okay. Okay, so that is that. We'll just take a look at some of the questions. I'm not going to solve those kind of questions, but I'm just telling you, okay? So this is one area that you will have to do, but a lot of this particular area, I don't think you will have to do much of studying for this. Okay, so science is going to be covered, and science you should be able to do it. You should take a lot of emphasis because in case you're an anthro student, trust me, this is basically like bonus questions for you. ठीक है, for others they have to study and be able to sort of solve it. ठीक है, जो generally वो जैसे पढ़ते हैं, okay, कितना emphasis वो देते हैं, okay, you will actually be doing this मतलब with more conceptual clarity. You have better sort of a feel for it. Okay, you have better sort of like intuition for it because you are studying this to a great sort of an extent. Okay, another area is going to be for ancient history. See, ancient history also you have a lot of these questions. Not entire sort of ancient history, not like your biology that almost all of your biology is going to be covered, right? When it comes to ancient history, right, especially when it comes to the early sort of topics in your any ancient history book. Generally, a lot of students basically do their Tamil Nadu ka book, or they basically do the new NCRTs or the old NCRTs. Okay, so this entire human sort of journey starting from your lower Paleolithic to middle Paleolithic to your upper Paleolithic, Mesolithic, Neolithic, right? So that entire those sequence, this archeo-based kind of questions becomes extremely clear. Okay, what exactly is stone tool technology? What are the different sort of sites? What are the different sort of tools? What are the burial patterns associated with which kind of period? You get the picture. What does it basically sort of signify? मतलब इतने logically हम आते हैं ना, so you basically convert a very logical, मतलब very factual sort of topics to very logical sort of topics. You can solve it any day. Okay, so those are the kind of things, right? So for Neolithic is basically about agriculture all the way till your Harappan. Okay, so your agriculture, so Stone Age basically ends, then Metal Age starts. Why copper basically comes first? Why bronze comes second, and then why does Iron Age basically come? Iron Age in the north is different from Iron Age in peninsular sort of region. How? What is it associated with? Right? So what exactly is PGW and NBPW is different from this thing? Why so? You get the picture, right? And then when you come to मतलब वो Chalcolithic अगर आप देख रहे हो, so Chalcolithic has certain kind of pottery. Each sort of place has particular kind of a pottery. Then basically you have Indus Valley civilization, Harappan sort of civilization, right? The different sort of pottery types, the trade routes, the urbanized, मतलब this is something that you have to do in great amount of detail. And in fact, जब आप masters level में ये पढ़ोगे, right? So what you study in your NCRT is that religion is so and so. ऐसा नहीं होता है. The script was so and so. यहाँ पे ऐसा नहीं होगा. The script में it could be so and so according to so and so kind of scholars who are basically arguing this way, but some who are basically against that. Right? They believe that it cannot be so and so. It has to be so and so because of so and so. Okay, so each of them basically make certain kind of arguments. Politically, you must be studying that it must have some sort of centralization. But there are different 3 different theories are there. Just to tell you, some 3 basic theories are there regarding what kind of centralization it must have been. ठीक है, if you basically talk about seals, what those seals basically signify, you understand, right? So there is a lot of cross link between what we call as these factual prelims based questions in history and what we study here in more sort of conceptual logic based, right? So most of these arguments are actually based on certain kind of logic and evidence. ठीक है, okay. And most importantly, Buddhism and Jainism, every single year you're going to be having questions. ठीक है, Buddhism and Jainism specifically in your Indian society, it is part of your syllabus. मतलब दोनों, it is part of your syllabus in your Indian society part also and also in tribal society of India वाला part. Is that clear? ठीक है, so मतलब there is a lot of overlap and then मतलब Buddhism, Jainism, every year you have questions. So you cannot get them wrong. So whatever you have studied or whatever you're going to study in your optional, right, you have to use them because it is going to give you a huge boost in your optional, in your prelims. ठीक है, so it's an important sort of aspect for sure. Apart from this, again, if you see, right, so you have about Indian society and tribes, right? Okay, so you have a very, very good direct sort of a knowledge about, the distribution of Indian population, the culture of Indian population, the economy of Indian population, the customs, the traditions. And there are so many questions that basically appear on these lines regularly in prelims. Okay, right? So vulnerable groups, social issues, constitutional protections. ठीक है, all these are themes that are very easy to understand because you have a better sort of understanding. उसका application आप देखते हो. How does it basically work well? When does it basically not work well? Why so? Right? Forest rights, tribal displacement, migration, welfare schemes. ठीक है, caste, tribe, minorities, gender, right? All of these sort of elements. So you have a lot more sort of real world understanding. So anthropology basically builds a real world sort of understanding. So when UPSC basically gives you a conceptual sort of MCQ, you can actually recognize what is practical and what is intuition based, what is unlikely, what seems practical and what seems unlikely, right? Because you have a real world understanding, okay, which will improve your at least your elimination process of elimination wala strategy, right? And so on. So prelims mein you will see a lot of these kind of questions. In fact, if I can go here, you can see for example, you can see these kind of questions, right? So see again, see PVTGs, right? PVTGs reside in 18 states and union territories. A stagnant or declining population is one of the criteria. In fact, there's some criteria. Okay. There are 95 sort of PVTGs officially notified in the country so far. Irula and Konda tribes are included in the list of PVTGs. Okay, this is a question that most anthropology trained students are never going to get this. गलत हो ही नहीं सकता. You get the picture, right? But for a lot of other students, how do you remember that there are 95 or this not 95? 95 नहीं है. In fact, anthropology students can actually tell कि पहले कितने थे, उसके बाद कितने add हुए हैं. Right? And these are not things that basically keep getting added that often. ये होता नहीं है. And अगर वो add करना है, तो भी what is the process? वो भी उनको पता होगा. It's an easy 2.66 elimination. Even the negative को avoid करोगे तो it's basically 2.66 kind of question. Right? So as simple as this. And इसका question तो हमेशा, like almost every year it basically comes. Right? So anthropology teaches you this. What exactly counts as PVTG? Why do you need a PVTG? Right? Okay, so a declining population, a low literacy, a pre-agri level of technology, and a small population, declining sort of population, all of these things. ठीक है, you can easily eliminate these kind of options. Irula, Konda Reddy, उनके problems हम बहुत बार पढ़ते हैं. कितने हैं? If you guys know, 75 PVTGs. ठीक है? Not 95. So that seems like a very tough sort of a question. Why do they ask you? Do we have to basically look at different sort of groups and look at कि कितने groups of people are there in each of these things? Actually, it's not. But यहाँ पे तो it is very evident to anthro students. If a particular area is brought under fifth schedule of the Constitution of India, which one of these things following statements basically reflects the consequence of it? ठीक है, again, not to basically try to sit here and solve this particular question, but fifth schedule areas इतने अच्छे से आपको पढ़ना पड़ता है. Sixth schedule area इतना अच्छे से पढ़ना पड़ता है, right? Lakshmikant basically has only one page, right? Your short notes will basically be a lot more. How is it basically operating in those 10 states? How is sixth schedule basically operating in those 4 states? Which of those states which of those areas it's working really well? Okay, which has been provided as this poster child of a positive sort of example? Where exactly are we sort of like being left behind? Right? Where exactly are there issues that need to be ironed out? Right? So this becomes simple when you know anthropology and the content of especially that tribal societies and tribal land rights and uska whole history of tribal administration agar aap dekhoge. The whole point is to prevent the transfer of tribal land to non-tribals, which basically started with the British. How do we provide them the protection? So very much in detail that is being done in your paper 2. Okay? So land rights, PISA, FRA, Forest Rights Act, tribal autonomy, constitutional sort of safeguards. These are all common sort of topics. You will always find questions, yeah. ठीक है, then Buddhism and Jainism, right? And you have Harappan civilization, right? So for example, so this is not about Buddhism and Jainism, but let's say कि this is IVC. Almost every year you'll be having questions on IVC, ठीक है, मतलब and you will know IVC literally, इतना कि मतलब when India and Pakistan was separated, ठीक है, which are the kind of things that basically came to India, which are the things that basically went to Pakistan, how do they basically do that division, right? Dancing girl, what does it, what does it basically signify, ठीक है, metallurgy, okay, bronze culture, Harappan craft traditions, right? So you immediately know, matlab, what to look at and things like this. Dholavira, in fact, I believe Dholavira was, so matlab, these are all very, very common kind of questions. Water management. Okay, and you study this again and again कि मतलब it's not something that you will ever be confused or मतलब वो confusion कभी नहीं होगा, because it's again a very good example of Harappan urban planning of a particular type with reservoirs and these rainwater harvesting and मतलब these मतलब this ancient engineering sort of innovations that had taken place. ठीक है, public architecture, storage systems, drainage, all of these things are like these prominent sort of examples. So literally these are all मतलब ले लो 2 marks, ले लो 2 marks. ठीक है, for many of them it could even be मतलब कि 2.6. So actually this is a very simple question. I think I think many of them might get it right. These kind of questions as well. Bio, especially this bio and genetics and human evolution and these kind of topics. For example, see, take a look at this. Every single year you're going to see questions on these. Okay, so let's take a look at these questions. So with reference to agriculture in India, how can the technique of genome sequencing, often seen in the news, be used in immediate sort of future? Genome sequencing, okay, can be used to identify genetic markers for disease resistance, for drought tolerance in various sort of crop plants. This technique helps in reducing the time required to develop new varieties of crop plants. It can be used to decipher the host pathogen relationships in crops. In what way also you should probably be able to know. But of course, prelims में इतना you cannot craft a question that is itna long. Right? Look at this particular question, right? So in the context of recent advances in human reproductive technology, pro-nuclear transfer is used for the fertilization of egg in vitro by the donor sperm, genetic modification of sperm-producing cells, development of stem cells into functional sort of embryos, prevention of mitochondrial diseases in offspring. Which of these is it? And do you even know कि मतलब if you मतलब if you basically done your bio, जहाँ पे you biological anthro type में, if you've basically done it in a way that concept and clarity and वगैरह आपका है, you even know कि मतलब कहाँ पे they are trying to basically try to trick you. ठीक है, otherwise it is like you know it or you don't know it types. You get the picture, right? So you know it or you don't know it types के भी होते हैं. So मतलब ऐसे बहुत सारे. So as I'm telling you, right? So prelims में many of these kind of questions, there are tons and tons of science के questions and they tend to be mostly bio. ठीक है, एक क्वेश्चन होगा फिजिक्स का, एक क्वेश्चन होगा केमिस्ट्री का, ठीक है, बट एक्चुअली इट इज अ लॉट मोर ऑफ योर genome sequencing. So this basically we have to study DNA sequencing. So what exactly is DNA sequencing and DNA sequencing in agriculture? ठीक है, so see the whole point is in when you're doing your anthropology, you've got to understand कि how do you basically sort of make things better for humanity. ठीक है, so can you basically use something from your biology that you've studied, some advancement from biology for some immediate sort of benefit, okay, for crop improvement, for solving the problem of hunger, right? So matlab, that you study these, what are genes, what are these markers, adaptation, right? Okay, host pathogen sort of relationships that they're bringing in, these are matlab actual topics. Okay, these statements actually become a lot more sort of intuitive. एक बार मतलब once you do it and when you write it and then you sort of internalize it, you मतलब even prelims में आपको याद रहेगा. ठीक है, pro nuclear sort of a transfer, right? So once you do your bio, I generally tell students कि वो Sunday का news जो है ना, it will become very interesting because you know and you can finally understand it. There are many students who will not be able to understand that Sunday में Hindu में you'll basically have this, right? It's a very simple thing. It's basically a technique of assisted reproductive sort of technology that is used to kind of prevent mitochondrial diseases in children. राइट मतलब आपको लाइक यू विल अंडरस्टैंड दिस, फर्टिलाइजेशन है, जाइगोट फॉर्मेशन है, सेल ऑर्गेनेल्स क्या है, ओके, मतलब मैटरनल इनहेरिटेंस क्या होता है, राइट? दी इफ यू बेसिकली नो द बेसिक्स ऑफ दिस काइंड ऑफ थिंग्स, दिस क्वेश्चन देन यू विल अंडरस्टैंड इज फेयरली स्ट्रेट फॉरवर्ड, राइट? सो मतलब इन वेरी सिंपल ना, मतलब इसका फंडा ये है कि आफ्टर बेसिकली यू हैव एन एग एंड द एग बेसिकली इज फर्टिलाइज्ड बाय द स्पर्म व्हेन इट इज इन ओव्यूलेशन, राइट? इट बेसिकली कंटेन्स 2 pronuclei. Okay, one basically has to come from the mother and the other basically has to come from the father. Right? So when you have these kind of pro-nuclear sort of transfer, the doctors or matlab, jo bhi hai, those specialists, embryologists and all, they basically call them right now, they basically remove both ठीक है, pronuclei from the affected embryo, then they end up inserting this thing into that donor egg. Okay, and the donor egg that basically has that healthy sort of mitochondria. मतलब it's very मतलब intuitive है. So what ends up happening is that this baby basically gets that nuclear DNA from the mother and the father, and you get that healthy mitochondrial DNA as well from that donor. So this could essentially prevent mitochondrial diseases that are actually passed only through the maternal line. So that's why I'm saying, the answer can be this one, but that's a lot more sort of, again, it will be intuition based. Now, they could basically give you some options that make you sort of like, question yourself. Okay, they're introducing mitochondrial DNA, maternal sort of inheritance, human sort of reproduction, fertilization. कितने सारे concepts हमें पता रहना चाहिए in order to be able to understand this. Zygote development, genetic sort of abnormalities to be resolved through these kind of things. ठीक है, so basic science में, as you study कि what exactly is so and so, अगर ऐसे पढ़ोगे and then they give options like this, then it becomes a little difficult, right? Every student knows कि what does mitochondria do. ठीक है, but beyond that, how does it, that's what I'm saying about conceptual clarity. What happens? How does it essentially work, right? So these kind of things can basically help you to a great extent. So those of you who are again watching and you're writing your 2026, please trust me, do invest in science, because many of these questions, थोड़ा सा अगर आपका concept clear है, these things become very intuitive. ठीक है, मतलब even if you basically think कि मतलब what could happen and then go for it ना, okay, 8-9 times out of 10 you'll basically get it right. Even if there is some gaps here, okay? So let's say there are some sort of gaps, but your intuition is going to be more right in comparison to any other person who has just studied ki pronuclear transfer is basically blah 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 blah. You get the picture, right? Okay, so thoda sa in depth and thoda sa a little bit of appreciation is going to give you a lot of these marks, and you need these marks in prelims. Okay, you cannot let go of these marks. Society, tribes that I basically told you about, like Putukuli blankets was something that was asked in prelims. ठीक है, there was something about, let's say, the different sort of languages. They had basically given a few languages, ठीक है, Kui and certain other sort of languages, and they basically asked मतलब ये क्या है? Something that, and some of those names are essentially the names of the tribes itself that speak them. ठीक है, cannot be made a mistake by any sort of Anthroco students. ठीक है, you have a lot of these questions, especially from ancient history, Buddhism, Jainism. These are all मतलब if you know that यहाँ से questions आने वाले हैं, you've got to be very very thorough, because prelims has become मतलब always it's been very competitive. अगर general category हो, it's like 0.5% of the people who are going to go to the next stage, right? So use whatever advantage that you have. ठीक है, every other thing where you're going to do current affairs, everybody else is going to do current affairs. You're going to do your 5-6-7 subjects, okay? Everybody else is going to do it. You're going to do some tests, they're going to do those tests. But you have certain things जहाँ पे you have better sort of intuition. Science and tech is definitely, bio is something definitely, right? So many of these kind of areas are some things that is really in polity, especially polity wala angle. You will see that you have better sort of feel for polity as well. Okay. Now let's also go into anthro for mains. See, when you go to GS1 as a subject, right, what you essentially see, I'll tell you from the students who have actually made it in the past, my students, okay, very, very young students who have basically started, they come to Anthro ka class, Anthro basically gets over, but GS basically takes a long time. So Anthro gets done. So once they have a little bit of a hold in Anthro, then they start realizing that, they're able to sort of like use their Anthro for so many different sort of questions. Take an Indian society ka question, use that. I know something about caste, let me use that. I know something about gender, let me use that. I know something about diversity, let me use that. I know something about social change and how globalization and social change, या ये वाला and social change, modernization and social, I know that, let me use that. Tribal sort of groups, use that. हमेशा questions आते हैं उनमें से. All these things are very like ready-made for you. You have very clear-cut kind of case studies that you've used it multiple times. The only thing is that, you have a lot of these scholar names. I don't know if you want to use them. ठीक है, Anthro में अगर you have to use them, but यहाँ पे I don't think you need them as much. But you have structure. You basically have a lot of examples. When you talk about patriarchy, right, you can use anthropological sort of gender studies are available, right, that tell you very specifics. यहाँ पे ऐसा था and this has been found. You can actually integrate that. When you talk about tribes, constitutional details आप लेके आ सकते हो. When you talk about diversity, you can quote so many different kind of cultural practices, because that is what anthropology students basically study. They study different kind of societies and how they are different and what makes them unique. Okay, you have so इतना rich examples आप कर सकते हो. In fact, अगर आप देखोगे, if I basically just go here and show you the syllabus here, ठीक है, your I don't think I've written anything here. So if I can go here, this is basically your syllabus, ठीक है, of your GS mains. Okay, so let's say this is your GS1. Okay, so this is your history. So ancient history is something that you have already done. मतलब I've already talked about this, right? So prelims के लिए करोगे तो mains के लिए भी आ सकते हैं, and that is that. But if you take a look, right, history, society, and geography are basically the three subjects, and 85 marks on average, मान लो. But generally, from what I've noticed, 90 marks are from Indian society. There's reason why Anthro students essentially do well in GS1, or they feel कि मतलब okay ठीक है, like I feel comfort in this particular subject, is because history and geography तो anyways prelims के लिए भी कर रहे हो. Okay, but Indian society is basically something that for many students, it's you just don't get a feel for it. Your entire Indian society is basically covered. Okay, except for that urbanization. Urbanization में मतलब it's not going to teach you कि मतलब drain जैसे लगाओ. That's not the point. But you understand now urbanization and the problems, urbanization and the impacts. Right? You study like almost everything here, right? So literally it is from your syllabus itself. Salient features of Indian society, who would know this better? Diversity of Indian society, who would know this better? Okay, literally you have to study multiculturalism. All these things are basically there, part of your syllabus. Women, right? Population related, poverty and developmental issues. Literally it seems like a subset of your anthro. Okay, anthro paper 2. Urbanization में a little addition you basically have to do here. Okay, and the problems and the remedies, मतलब you will never be able to stop writing. ठीक है, इतने सारे knowledge base आपके होंगे. Effects of globalization on Indian society. You will know it on every single group. You'll be able to construct it. Okay, globalization is definitely part of your syllabus, both in your paper 1 and in your paper 2. I hope that you're able to see the screen. Okay, I'm not able to see myself, but if you can, in case you're not able to see it, are you guys able to see it? Okay, if you're not able to see it, but I'm just reading it out so that you can see this. Okay, or if I can just increase the size. Okay, I'll be out of the screen, but I'm not the important one here, right? So you can see the effect of globalization in Indian society, part of your paper 1, also paper 2 as well. Social empowerment, communalism, regionalism, secularism, every one of these things is actually part of your syllabus. Okay, communalism कैसे? Social empowerment of different sort of groups. ठीक है, regionalism, right? Literally it's part of your syllabus. Okay, मतलब perspectives भी हैं कि मतलब उसको कैसे पढ़ना है, what is in group, what exactly is out group, okay, ethnicity, ethnic conflict, right, what makes, मतलब these kind of elements are also going to be part of it. ठीक है, salient features of world's physical geography नहीं, यहाँ से it's basically geography, ठीक है, so it is that. So but yeah, all the way from here, ठीक है, from your entire society basically part is completely covered. With the urbanization में I'll put a little bit of an asterisk, ठीक है, and that is that. So मतलब इतने सारे are already covered. So when you start writing whatever they're asking for, okay, so many different kind of ideas will basically come to your mind. So many of our students, as I told you, right? So they essentially finish their anthro, वो हो जाता है in 4 something months, 80 classes, 85 classes, मान लो, ठीक है? So once that is done, when you're starting to write answers here, right? Even before you basically do a lot of studying, you will still be able to construct and craft answers because कुछ ना कुछ content आ रहा है. Now you will not only be able to sort of create arguments, you will be able to sort of like provide evidence and specifics, which you have done in your anthro already. So anthro basically provides you with a lot of ready-made examples and statistics and case studies and all these kind of things just to enrich your answers. Similarly, if you go to your paper 2, again, if you can see here, anthro paper 2, and some examples, right? So I don't want to sort of bore you by going through all of these kind of questions, but I'm telling you, right? It will be so difficult. You don't know whether this is unless I basically tell you which question paper it is, you will not know कि ये anthro का paper है कि ये GS का paper है. The only thing is that anthro का paper है, so you have to basically talk about the salient features, okay, and some perspectives. ठीक है, थोड़ा सा डिटेल में तो करना पड़ेगा. Gregory Possehl basically talks about this in so and so kind of way, right? Jonathan Kenoyer basically argues against whatever the other one. You get the picture, right? So salient features of Harappan architecture, does tribal development in India center around 2 axes? Those are मतलब displacement and rehabilitation. In fact, कि resettlement is not necessarily rehabilitation. Where exactly do you basically draw the line? ठीक है, are we doing a lot more resettlement? Are we doing a lot more rehabilitation? If you're doing rehabilitation, what has been good and what has not been good? ठीक है, मतलब you have इतने detail, like, and you will feel कि मतलब 250 words, oh, that's all I have. I have so much more to sort of offer, right? Again, so given the diversities among tribal communities in India, in which specific context should they be considered as a single sort of category? मतलब इसमें बहुत सारे actual debates. In fact, this is a technical question. ठीक है, I don't think you will be able to sort of answer this. मतलब आपको कहीं कुछ create करना पड़ेगा, but you'll never be in that right line of thinking. Just to define what a tribe is, you have so many different kind of मतलब debates है. What exactly makes a tribe a scheduled tribe? Okay, and what should be the criteria for the scheduled tribe? And should that be a fluid sort of a thing, or should we still stick to that Lokur committee ka the criteria that has been given? This is, I don't think any other student will be able to sort of write this kind of answer well, or this answer well, or this. This is literally like something that you will be really be able to sort of like write a lot better. ठीक है, because of anthropology. I think, amongst all these kind of subjects, I think GS2 basically has the highest sort of relevance. Okay, because in Indian society and tribal, you basically have to study about the constitutional safeguards, right? Matlab GS2 mein you must have seen in that syllabus कि you have vulnerable groups, you have welfare schemes for those vulnerable groups, you have constitutional sort of protections for those groups. Okay, anthropology specifically covers your SC groups, scheduled caste groups, the Dalit groups, the scheduled tribe groups, the OBC groups, the religious minorities, the linguistic sort of minorities, gender-related issues in deep detail. You study the history, you study the current sort of challenges, why you have those challenges, what are the developmental sort of needs. You study women, women within SCs, women within STs, intersectionality. You basically have, these are the most disadvantaged sort of groups. Literally you have all this that you study in your anthro becomes your ready-made content for GS questions, especially like your GS questions, okay, with regard to your deprivation, with regard to your affirmative action, reservation, right, with regard to social justice, with regard to welfare, evaluating those and analyzing those kind of things. GS2 basically has topics like, your poverty hai, exclusion hai, right? That's literally, it's like anthro note uthao. Okay, poverty rates, it's not just poverty, right? You cannot just say ki 20% hai, ki 30% hai. Okay, you basically have to understand that, the STs have the highest. The next highest is SCs and the minorities. Okay, minorities as in the Muslims, right? It is very high amongst women, especially the tribal sort of women. Okay, they have that double burden, gender, tribal, and isolated location. What exactly is fifth schedule? What exactly is sixth schedule? What is Article 46? What is Article 350A? What is Article 366 subclause? So and so and so and so. What is Article 342? Okay, what are the different sort of schemes that are available? Post-matric scholarships are available. Stand-up, what is it? Stand-up India. Okay, you basically have your PVTG missions. You have your, TriFed. There are so many of these things that you have to study. You have to study. Insights क्या है उनके बारे में? You have to evaluate them in our optional. यहाँ पे you have to list them. Okay, so it's a lot easier. GS2 I think it becomes a lot easier. ठीक है, इतने सारे हैं, from your GS2, which I think makes GS2 a lot easier. And then again, if you take a look at GS3, see GS3 we basically say inclusive growth. Again, inclusive growth is, see, GDP is not necessarily growth for every single group, right? So basically, you're literally going back to that same vulnerable sort of groups, right? Inclusive growth essentially means participation. It means Dalit participation in that economy. It means tribal participation in that economy. It means access to the minorities. It means inclusion of that gender in that GDP wala this thing that is basically increasing. But is that happening? We said key development and rehabilitation. So meaning some groups essentially eventually give out whatever is their kind of assets, okay, and it results in growth for some groups, and it becomes, some groups actually become victims of this, And for this, you basically have data, you basically have examples, you basically have a lot of these regional specific variations and specifics. You have a lot of these kind of case studies, okay, that many GS only kind of students will not be able to go in that amount of depth. Okay? You get the picture, right? So, there is PVTGs, there's malnutrition, there is, nutrition, there are so many different kind of things. So many of these things, Kelly, you will basically have these fresh kind of examples. Environment is also another sort of a topic. Environment also, by the way, I forgot to mention that in prelims as well. Ecology, tribes are basically custodians of ecology, different sort of ecology. Disaster management may, in fact, like, the tribes basically have their own ways of being able to tell कि tsunami आ रहा है कि नहीं आ रहा है. You guys must have known कि 2004, what must have happened. Okay, in fact, like, in Simlipal Tiger Reserve, okay, and the national park wala thing, right? The locals basically have their own sort of tribal ecological knowledge. Okay, if the leaves are so warm or something, even at the end of like 3 p.m., right, there is going to be a fire that is coming up, forest fires. Well, you get the picture. So I say both are there, which is now getting integrated even within the forest department. Okay, so we might have this early warning systems, and we have all this quantification and things like this, but there is nothing like the tribal wisdom. Okay, there are many of these kind of things. So many, right? So including internal security, for example, left-wing extremism इतने अच्छे से आपको करना पड़ता है. Many like Bastar, and which are the different sort of pockets and why it basically happens, right? Okay, so generally for GS students they only have development karo and basically has strengthened the security sort of architecture. There are so many different sort of angles here. Right, so many different sort of angles here. Right, इतने अच्छे से आप पढ़ोगे, right? A lot of people actually say that the tribes are the ones in this, but वहां पे also you'll understand that the tribes are basically the foot soldiers who are basically caught between what we call as the paramilitary or and basically the Maoist sort of groups. बहुत सारे मतलब nuances are there, depth is there, right? मतलब there are so many things that you would probably be able to sort of like craft a lot better. In fact, it'll be with 150 words it becomes a little difficult to really bring out your entire sort of knowledge here. At least 250 अगर होता है. Surprisingly this is 150, but generally ये 250 के ही होते हैं. GS4, ठीक है. So GS4 again अगर आप देखोगे ethics में again I'm telling you this, you have a lot of these real life case studies. I have seen many of my students basically sort of see UPSC में ना, as I told you, right, you basically have to understand what is this exam like. It is not the most amount of knowledge and I'll study everything and I'll revise everything and be able to go to the exam. The smaller it is and more sort of overlap it is, okay, it is going to be more beneficial to you. If you can basically do a very small optional and use that small optional ka so many of these different kind of things. If you can use forest right violations and basically link it to your ethics. If you can basically try to bring in this women facing some structural sort of a bias and link it to ethics. If you can bring in examples of communities basically struggling despite providing certain kind of laws, and if you can basically link them to justice and human values and compassion and failure of whatever kind of institutions, right? You can basically, if you can connect it to ethical sort of a leadership. Right? So all of these things are basically going to give you a paper that real human touch, that human centric, that unique sort of angle. You get the picture, right? Public service and civil service values. Okay, in you have all of those kind of things, right? Well, there are tribal claimants under things like FRA, Dalit women complainants, minority sort of groups, urban poor, right? Okay, you have so many of these kind of things, right? When you can take a look at the world through anthropological lens, you'll be able to sort of connect many of these ethical concerns and dilemmas in government, okay, and I believe private institutions, something like this is syllabus. You have classic sort of real life dilemmas that are happening, okay, evicting forest dwellers for a tiger sort of a reserve, or honoring the FRA ka whatever rights that they're supposed to get, where forest officers are involved, your district magistrates are involved, your NGO staff are involved. How do you balance your biodiversity sort of goals with livelihood sort of concerns, with legal sort of mandates? ठीक है, मतलब इतने nuanced sort of examples आपको मिलेंगे. You have this Manipur sort of a conflict that is taking place. ठीक है, it's a live case for police and civil servants. You have a dilemma. Majority pressure hai. At the same time, you have minority ka protection that is part. What is democracy? Minority protection with rule by majority. Okay? You have orders coming from your political sort of executives. You understand, right? Okay, but at the same time, you have to balance that with constitutional sort of duty. Kuki, Zo, tribal sort of Christians, vis-a-vis Metis, Hindus kind of groups. Private sector. Corporates are basically acquiring a lot of land in the areas that they're not supposed to be, scheduled areas, those 10 states. Okay, Gram Sabha, scheduled tribes. You get the picture, right? So, there are so many of these kind of things that you can actually bring in. Accountability. Okay, ethical sort of governance. Supreme Court's judgment, right? So, you have this in terms of, there are so many. I can bring, there's no end to it. And you will have so many of these kind of examples that you can bring in with regard to ethics. Okay, so ethics may, a lot of people basically again go for those typical examples. It's your Gandhi, it is going to be your MLK, right? It's going to be your Armstrong Palme, it's going to be, you get the picture, right? Those are good examples, but yahan pe you have like real examples. When you really are writing about a particular point, ki aisa problem hai, okay, you literally have a very specific sort of a case that is appearing in your head. When you write an example here, you're literally bringing a real live event here. A lot better sort of connect. Okay, literally you're saying, but this is the actual sort of a case. This is happening in the world right now as we write this particular exam. You will see a lot of this kind of stuff. So, it makes a very rich, very unique, okay, very in-depth kind of a paper, and human sort of centric paper. You will really feel that, somebody who's actually been there with the most vulnerable sort of groups in different paths, okay, and how administration has basically dealt with them or is struggling to deal with it in an appropriate sort of a manner, and you are able to sort of like touch upon those angles. For a student who is basically not in administration, to be able to bring all of these kind of angles makes their paper look very different. Okay? And again, anthropology and essay. So I think this would be one jump. I think most students would actually use this, right? So more than GS2, GS1, GS3, GS4, I think the first thing it will actually come for them more naturally is to be able to sort of use anthropology. Anthropology actually becomes a secret sort of advantage here. It gives you stories. Okay? It basically gives you stories to write. Okay? It basically gives you case studies to build your anecdotes. It basically gives you many different kind of scholar views that you can actually use in essays. A lot of students are basically doing this. It basically gives you a lot of insights about humans and human societies. It makes your essays basically stand out. Okay, in fact, there was a question, culture is what we are and civilization is what we have. Culture and civilization is a direct part of your syllabus from socio-cultural anthro. इतने सारे aspects you can actually bring in. You can actually sort of introduce, okay, introduction में नहीं, maybe, you know, the first angle you can actually bring in anthropological culture sort of a theory, you know, culture shaping identity. You know, there are, you know, you could bring in Malinowski and those kind of views. You can basically bring in what exactly is civilization, what exactly is culture, okay, you know, Tyler का definition है civilization, right? McIver and things like this. What exactly does culture do? Culture basically guides behavior. What does civilization do? It basically creates certain kind of tools, right? Societies, how do they basically balance, or how do they basically use the tool? There was another sort of an essay. I believe the essay was a society. The society basically has more justice. Is basically a society that needs less charity. Yeah, I think this was the topic. I don't know if I have it. No, I don't think I have included it, but the question was something like this, along these lines, right? It is basically a society that has more justice, is basically a society that needs less charity. So if there is more justice, you need less charity, right? So this question is actually about, you know, an anthropology student can actually understands the core of this. It's about structural inequality, right? And if there is justice, then you don't need people to basically do things, you know, from that paternalistic kind of a way. Right? You can bring in tribal marginalization, you can bring in caste stratification, alienation, manual scavenging amongst SCs, minorities, their exclusion, right? You get the picture, right? So these actually become very strong arguments showing why proper systemic sort of a justice is a lot more important, right, than this episodic sort of a charity based on, you know, your goodwill and when you have your good mood. Again, you will basically add views of many different sort of scholars. The easy one, GS ke log, you know, you can actually bring in Amartya Sen, that capability, link them with, you know, many anthropological field studies. Okay, in fact, there was a essay, I think a couple of years ago, forests are basically the best case studies for economic excellence. Okay, I don't think a non-anthropologist will be able to write an answer to this thing. Okay, to really bring out like many different sort of angles. Otherwise, you know, it will sound like you're being repetitive. Forests are not just ecological spaces. They are living, thriving economic systems. Okay, they are actually cultural systems. They are actually knowledge systems. You'll not be able to understand this, you know, but an anthropologist will be able to really understand what it means. Okay, anthropology, Apatani ka, there was a question on Apatani agriculture. This fits in really well here. The Koyaka shifting cultivation. Okay, the Todas and their buffalo, sacred sort of buffaloes. Okay, indigenous sort of ecological knowledge. Okay, sustainable development that we basically keep saying, right, that we keep harping about, is actually like, you know, the actual ways of life of many of these, right? So how do you basically have balanced sort of economic development? How do you basically have, you know, cultural ethics? Okay, how do you basically build this long-term sort of resilience? All of these things become a lot easier. Patriarchy ke baare mein there was a question. Patriarchy is the least noticed, yet the most significant structure of, you know, social inequality or something like this. So gender roles and kinship systems and inheritance rules and, you know, so many different sort of angles. Literally, these are all anthro se aap nikal sakte ho. What are the other sort of questions? So, you know, you have many of these, right? So there are a few more. Every year you basically have this. Literally, some are exactly anthro ऐसे आपको लगता है, and some of them essentially are जहाँ पे, you know, even if you basically just use pestle approach, okay, you know, whether you're using a pestle approach or whether you're using like, you know, a spatial, temporal sort of, you know, whichever kind of approach that you're using, temporal history, you know it really well. You have so many different things. I told you anthro is a little bit of culture, it's a little bit of history, it's a little bit of gender, it's a little bit of tribes, it's a little bit of ecology and environment, right? So meaning you have so many different sort of dimensions. Any dimension that you want, you basically have a lot of arguments that you can have and lots of anecdotes and case studies and evidence that you can use to sort of like build those arguments and validate those arguments. If you can just learn to put them together, like if you can just weave them together, you actually have a very, very rich sort of an essay. Okay, I've given you literally essays, you can use this a lot. So again, I'm telling you, for some of you who are already in your optional, always understand this, you know, anthro is basically a huge advantage. It is short, but a lot of your anthro is still part of other subjects. You want to keep your syllabus as short as possible, and whatever you have studied, if you studied for prelims, just, you know, just try to use whatever you studied for prelims in your mains. If you studied for your optional, which you have to, because optional is basically master's level, आपको Like you cannot basically clear and get a rank without your optional. Optional has to be very, very solid. Okay? And the smaller it is, the better it is, especially given this 2.5 months. So if you're going to study your optional really, really well, it is in your favor to constantly try to integrate many of these things from here. Right? So you feel I have not done some extra content for this. Nahi, you actually have a lot. And I hope that I've provided you very, very specific sort of examples that you can, that really makes you understand how students who are toppers in anthropology, have made it to the list with very little kind of effort or extra effort in GS. Is that clear? So many things, so many things. In fact, you can make your essay so interesting. And the last one is interview. Today I had a student who had been to interview. Okay, so I have another student who's going in a couple of days. You understand, right? So generally for interview, you have 3 aspects that you have to study. Take a preparation is essentially this, right? So 3 cheezein hote hain. One is basically DAF. Second is going to be current events. And the third is going to be your option. Okay? And generally what you start noticing is that students who have taken anthro, unke questions to hote hi hain. I've had one student who basically was not asked this particular question, and surprisingly, and she was part of a tribe as well. Okay? And apart from that particular student, I have never seen, interview panel not go into anthro. Generally your paper 2, right, your Indian society, your tribal, they always are very curious about what do you have to say. Ki yahan pe, as an anthropology trained student, where do you think we are going wrong? Okay? Because you study how to evaluate things, right? Why our schemes and welfare programs are not doing as well? Why do we have vulnerable groups that are still vulnerable after many years? Right? What exactly is the challenge that we're having with the different sort of groups? Okay? So you will be able to understand society better because you have certain concepts and frameworks and good methodical way to sort of look at society. So you will be able to sort of so anthropology basically gives you a huge advantage, in order to provide that balanced and sensitive and evidence-based sort of answers to their questions. Okay? And especially because, you study this well, they specifically ask you, since you're an anthropology student, what do you think about, the social tensions are essentially taking place? What is your take on caste, or which is the bigger sort of a challenge here? Right? Is it caste or class? Why do you think it is caste tensions? Why do you think they are basically persisting despite the fact that there is economic progress that are taking place? Right? Why are family structures basically changing in India? How is urbanization basically affecting, our Indian identity or that cultural sort of identity, that specific sort of identity they belong to? Whether Indian society is becoming more individualistic, really? Okay, is that really happening? What is the impact of globalization on, let's say, on Indian youth, on the Gen Zs and the Gen Alphas and the Gen Betas? Gen Beta just basically born, so not them, but you get the picture, right? So, well, they're actually kind of curious to see what you have to say. But of course, those are out of curiosity, but they're also interested in tribal issues and especially when it comes to developmental sort of debates, right? Okay, so how would you basically handle a conflict between a developmental sort of project and the tribal land rights that are given to them? If this comes, GDP basically goes up by so and so, but how do you balance them? Why do the particularly vulnerable tribal groups, the PVTs, still remain vulnerable after decades of all these kind of welfare schemes? Specifics are there. There are some things that really make it not work. Okay, are tribal customs compatible with modern sort of governance? For example, Nagaland, they have this thing that women basically don't contest for elections, but your Pisa Misa vagara are there, right? So Nagaland, when you bring in this urban sort of panchayats, those kind of concepts, you will understand that their customs, some of their customs may not be compatible with modern sort of governance. So where do you go? You want to also ensure the cultural autonomy. You don't sort of okay, but at the same time, you have modern governance as well. Okay, should that scheduled tribe wala status be expanded or reviewed? Because there are certain sort of tribal groups that seem to be overrepresented, certain sort of tribal groups never represented. Okay? Why certain movements are there that basically demand autonomy and self-rule even in today's time period? Constitutionally, are we not doing enough? And you will be able to answer these things with facts, with context, with nuance. Okay, and if you have questions on this vulnerable groups, welfare, inclusion, hit it for a 6. Right? Why is female labor participation low? You will have a perspective. Malnutrition persists, especially among certain groups. Manual scavenging persists despite laws against it. Minority education, what are the debates? Why is so much controversy? What does inclusion really mean when it comes to real sort of governance? So there are many things, right? So it basically gives you a lot of clarity on cultural sensitivity vis-a-vis your governance, vis-a-vis your development. right? And you will actually have a better way to sort of answer these things because you're not ethnocentric, you're cultural. मतलब relativism है, for those of you know what it is. ठीक है, there's a particular way to look at it without being judgmental. So you'll be able to build confident, real evidence-based sort of answers to their questions. Is that clear? So these are all the kind of benefits of this. So now I think I've spoken more than, what I would. I can keep going on and on, but I hope that you've basically gotten a picture. Right? So in case you're answering also, by the way, in these interview, you basically will be able to sort of like provide examples. You'll be able to provide specifics. You'll be able to provide, you'll be able to sort of like give specifics on, why do you feel so and so. Your answer and understanding is always grounded, and it is not some abstract sort of points like you write in mains. Real cases. You understand, right? So anyway, so I've basically given you कि मतलब बहुत सारा overlap है. Those of you who basically have any questions you can ask me. ठीक है, those of you who have already taken anthropology, I hope that you really take what I have mentioned here. There are so many benefits, ठीक है, of using your anthropology in your prelims. So whatever you studied for your prelims, please use them. ठीक है, especially bio, understand it, keep that conceptual clarity, ensure that you're basically outperforming everybody when it comes to your biology. Those science and tech topics, you should be able to get those questions right. You should not just think, okay, ये जो solution दिया है, I'm going to study it and I'm going to be going. नहीं, you've got to go a little, dig a little, right? Understand why, right? Why was I not able to sort of look at these 4 options? Because these are actual basic bio है ये. Okay, it's not something random ऐसा नहीं है. It's like basic bio अगर है, if you use intuition and logic, you'll be able to solve this question and genome sequencing question and all those kind of questions that you see every year. 6-7 questions होते हैं biology से every single year. If you get 6 questions out of, let's say 7-8 questions right, not even kidding, ठीक है, that is 16 marks. 16 marks. ठीक है, and many students would get it wrong. They would be like, okay, ये 2 options तक मैं पहुंच चुका हूं, but I'm not able to get the right answer here. Right? So you can get so many questions like this. So, those of you who have already taken your anthro, always understand कि बहुत सारे benefits are going to be there. ठीक है, use it. Right? Don't just think कि वो जब हम optional, वो 2.5 months में नहीं, you have to constantly do it. And especially those topics that are relevant, उसको whenever you have prelims के time में, वो prelims के topics I've basically shown you. Okay, GS1, GS2, GS3, GS4, you use these kind of things in order to enrich your answers. Right? Why study something new when you already have so many things with you, which can actually be richer, in fact. ठीक है, ओके, सो पॉवर्टी, वाई स्टडी न्यू थिंग्स. यू हैव, मतलब पॉवर्टी पढ़ रहे हो इतने डिफरेंट ग्रुप्स के, पॉवर्टी क्यों है, इंक्लूसिव ग्रोथ क्यों नहीं हो रहा है इन डिफरेंट, मतलब इतने सारे पढ़ रहे हो, सो यू हैव टू ट्राई टू यूज देम ऐसे. ओके, यू नो हाउ टू टेल अ स्टोरी. यू हैव अ लिटिल बिट ऑफ एवरीथिंग इन योर सिलेबस, बट ओनली छोटा लिटिल पार्ट्स you have. You have a big advantage that's a very small syllabus but can be used in so many different sort of places. Use it. Okay, it can be a huge sort of an advantage. 2.5 months में like nothing happens. Okay, before the result comes, it feels कि मतलब exam आ रहा है, means. So anybody who is already there post prelims, उन्हीं का होता है. Okay, GS तो हो जाता है because prelims के लिए anyways you're doing GS, but optional के लिए मतलब you don't get any time. So if you know your optional really well, in those 2.5 months, use whatever you know in your optional, use it मतलब profusely. Exhaust all your GS का knowledge, then think what all do I know from my anthro, and then let me try to use them here. Yeah, I'm going to use in my intro. This I'll put it in my conclusion. अरे I'll basically throw in a few constitutional articles because you know so many of them because आपको पढ़ना पड़ता है. ठीक है, I'm going to end with some of the scholarly sort of analysis, evaluation. I'm going to put a box and I'm going to say case study. मतलब I'm going to make my paper different from the others. Okay, whatever I have, exhaust करके मैं आऊँगा या आऊँगी. ठीक है, चलो, take care, bye.